Good afternoon, and welcome to today's IABC Heritage Region webinar. Are you ready for global technology trends? My name is Greg McCormick, and I'm Communication Chair for the IABC Heritage Region. Today we'll be talking about the top trending technologies and how they will impact business communication activities. Our presenter, Tracy M., ABC APR, is a communication expert and leadership coach based in Maryland. She tells senior leadership positions with global and national brands in aerospace and defense, energy, senior housing, and banking. Before launching her own small business, Tracy led the public affairs team at the Maryland Insurance Administration. She hosts her own podcast, Brave Girls with Tracy M., where she uses storytelling to empower other women. It's become clear that digital technology is no longer the cordoned off domain of IT. In fact, it's being applied to almost every part of a company's value chain, including the work done by communicators. Today, Tracy will help us understand the trends and complexities of topics such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, virtual reality, and big data. Before we begin, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. I'd like to introduce Amy Miller, an IABC Heritage Region board member and our tech associate for today's webinar. Amy will review a few quick points to help you gain the most from this experience.
Thank you, Greg. Everyone, if you would like to watch today's webinar in full screen mode, then mouse to the top right portion of your screen and you'll see 4 small arrows. Click on that symbol to toggle in and out of full screen mode. During the presentation, if you'd like to send us a comment or question for discussion, please use the chat button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just mouse down to the bottom of your screen and your toolbar will appear, including the chat button. If any of you have joined with others watching in the same room using a single connection, that's great. If that's your situation, we ask that you kindly let us know how many are at your location using the chat tool, just for our records. Tracy will answer questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation via chat later, right now we're showing some thoughts that may spur ideas for you. Also, today's webinar is being recorded. As a registered attendee, you will receive the following: a link to our very brief survey as you leave the webinar. Please take a moment to respond so we can keep making improvements. You'll also get an email with links to the recording of today's webinar and the slides. And now, back to Greg.
Thank you, Amy. With that, let's get started. Tracy, take it away.
All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by IABC Heritage Region. Go over what we're going to cover in the coming hour and the topics that I'm going to cover. So we're going to cover these 5 technology trends that are out there today that you may or may not know specifics about. I'm going to give you examples of how they're currently being used and where the future is for each of these technologies. And then I'm going to connect you back to your work as a communicator. And so one of the questions that we got in the submissions prior to the webinar was, is there a real threat that some of these technologies are going to take over communications? And the short answer is no. I think the best way to think about this is it's our job to understand what these technologies are, how they're being used in our organizations, and then how we can take an opportunity to up-level our skills as global communicators and to connect back to the technologies and how they impact our customers, our employees, and our suppliers. When I was preparing this, I really thought about what I wanted to cover, and I did a lot of research around these 5 technologies. And so what you're going to hear is going to be a very high-level explanation of what these technologies are, and I'm going to give you some examples of how companies are using them. My intention is to really get you to think, and to think after you've gone through this entire webinar, how you can look at your 2020 communications plan, how you can get into action with your business and IT partners, and how you can spark some action from the communication standpoint. So I think this is a good foundation for what I was able to learn through my research, and I'll share some of the resources that I used as I was putting this presentation together. So the first thing is, this is being called the fourth industrial revolution. And so this is a little bit of a writer downer. I would actually Google the term fourth industrial revolution to just bring yourself up to speed with this term. There's a lot of things under the umbrella of the fourth industrial revolution. And when I really looked at what were the main things that are happening in the world, they really break down into 5 different types of technologies. So you've got artificial intelligence, you've got machine learning, and I'm going to go through every single one of these. Machine learning is actually a subset of artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about blockchain, I'm going to talk about virtual reality, and I'm going to talk about big data. And one of the questions that we also got had to do with the federal government and how the federal government is using these types of technologies. And I would say that the federal government is using all of these different technologies just like private industry. It really depends on your specific federal or state agency and its mission in terms of how these technologies are being used. And some things that are different with government agencies is the security around firewall issues. And so if you have specifics about your particular federal government agency, or maybe you're consulting to a federal government agency, if you want to connect with me specifically about that, I'm more than happy to take questions, or you can even enter it into the chat. So let's start with artificial intelligence. So there's basically 3 types of artificial intelligence systems. These are sort of like the buckets that AI gets broken down into. So there's the analytical, which is just really looking at the data and making inferences. Then there's human inspired, and then there's humanized artificial intelligence. It's sort of a graduation in terms of the complexity of anticipating what your thoughts and your emotions may be, and thinking like a human. So the way it really works is there's some kind of a problem, and this agent or bot or whatever you want to call it is trying to reason, plan, learn, perceive. This is used in robotics a lot. But it's really based on probability theory and economics. And that's how these tools have been developed, is using the science behind how we reason, how we learn, how we perceive certain things. And so it's anticipating how you would actually process the information like a human and putting that into a system. And so machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. And so this is really the algorithms and the statistical models that the computer systems are using to perform a specific task. Machine learning, there's usually no explicit instructions. It's looking at the patterns and making inferences. So if you think of, you go to Amazon and you want to buy a particular book, and it will recognize that people who have bought this book in the past have also bought other books, and it will make those recommendations to you. That's all artificial intelligence and machine learning behind the scenes that's driving whether or not you are given data or information is presented to you by Amazon. So this is where the majority of companies are spending their time and their energy, is in the machine learning and artificial intelligence market. So annual growth rate for machine learning patents really grew by like 34% between 2013 and 2017. And where it's going in 2022, a few years down the road, it's expected to be an $8.8 billion market. And so companies that are outsourcing artificial intelligence and machine learning projects, this is their number one thing that they're spending money on globally. And so it's important that we as communicators understand the impact that this is having on our global businesses, and we pay attention to and understand. We don't have to know the deep dive in behind the scenes, but we do need to understand that this is where the majority of the business world is going in the next couple of years, and has been for the last couple of years. And so I just want to give you some examples. These are all things that are artificial intelligence and machine learning in action. So if you think of Siri, and that you speak voice recognition into your phone and ask Siri particular questions. We also have image recognition, and this would be facial recognition. We have things like spam filtering. Another example I was able to find was in the airline industry. AI and machine learning is used when airlines are trying to predict when flights may be delayed. It's also the way they do their scheduling for their airline crews. They're using this technology. If you think about targeted online ads, this is another application basically. And then on the right-hand side, when you go into drones, self-driving cars, this is all artificial intelligence and machine learning that's powering it. Later in the presentation, we're going to talk about how the healthcare industry is using AI, machine learning, big data, and some of these other things with the medical diagnosis process. And then there's things like chess or Go that are more gaming. And then, of course, the #1 search engine in the world, Google and YouTube, is using machine learning and AI. If you think about if you've bought a personal assistant or a smart speaker, Amazon Alexa, Amazon Echo, Google Home, those types of things, these they're integrating it into the personal assistants that are listening to our conversations on our smartphones and through these devices. Video surveillance. If you think about social media and you think about things like Pinterest that will pull up and show you similar pins that you may like, this is all machine learning and AI behind the scenes. And then how many of us have called call centers, or we want to get something resolved and there's a chat bot that is going to try and run you through scripts, and it's going to answer specific questions because they know these are the top 5 questions that consumers have before they ping you over to a real person that's going to run the chat, before they kind of push you into their call center or dealing with somebody that is a more technical expert. So there's a lot of applications that are we're seeing out in the global marketplace. And depending on your industry and depending on who your customers are, who your supply chain is, who your employees are, we're all impacted by it. It's here now. And so while it's not probably taking over our jobs completely, we have to sort of be in harmony with it and understand how it's being introduced into our business processes. So if you think of Amazon, I think Amazon's probably a great example of trying to show up smarter, give us a more personalized experience. When you think about B2C marketing, this is a lot of it is where it's initially been introduced, but even if you work in a B2B environment or a B2G environment and you're developing communications, I think understanding how organizations like Amazon are using this technology. And so in the healthcare sector, you see it in disease detection and insight. You also see it on the clinical side with assistance and automation of repeated tasks. And then another industry is in agriculture. There's a lot more ag tech firms that are now emerging that do things with these technologies in terms of soil monitoring, energy and water management, and process analysis. And so you're starting to see other industries kind of develop out of the use of this technology. So here's kind of where I want to take a pause. So we understand that these types of examples, I think they're pretty straightforward. But what I want to really spark you into action is what's being used now in your current state, looking out at your industry and the sector that you're in and your competitors, and how are they implementing these two technologies? And then asking yourself, how comfortable are you in developing communications tactics that support either the deployment or the implementation of AI and machine learning? Because you're going to be the one responsible for that change management around this new technology being introduced into how you're interfacing with your external audiences. And so think about the impact that this could have on your customer journey. Think about where it could be introduced into the employee experience. And if you think about the whole life cycle of an employee, everything from thinking about wanting to work at your organization, the talent acquisition process, all the way through the employee experience, all the way through they're no longer an employee, they're an alumni. And then also looking at your supply chain and the vendors that are supplying your organization with maybe parts or services for your ultimate end customer output. And so think about, are you in your 2020 communications plans, are these types of things showing up as activities that you need to put on your radar to support? So now I'm going to pivot a little bit and we're going to talk about blockchain. And so blockchain really came into existence in the public consciousness around 2008 as a way to track Bitcoin digital currency transactions. And at its core, if you really distill it down, it's basically this digital ledger that is tamper-proof and transparent. So things can happen inside this vault, basically, and information can be shared in a secure environment. And so really the leader in blockchain space when I was doing my research really seemed to be IBM. And they have a really nice book called Blockchain for Dummies, which you can download if you really want to learn the ins and outs of blockchain. But at its highest level, if you think of it as this vault, this digital ledger out in the cloud that's keeping track of what's going on in between transactions between parties. That's sort of the best way to think about it. And so I'm going to talk about the applications that I came across when I was doing my research on blockchain. So in the insurance industry, it's a highly regulated industry, and it's done at the state level. It's not a federal regulatory environment. And so there's a lot of compliance. There's laws, there's regulations that insurance carriers have to basically follow. And blockchain allows private industry to have a data exchange with state regulators. And processes can get secure, or they can be streamlined within this, vault, basically, where information around people's personal health information is shared, information about people's addresses, anything that's your personal information that you really don't want flying out in the middle of the stratosphere there. You want it within the self-contained environment. 91% of the industry in the financial services area is really investing in this. So if you think about banks and you think about banking becoming more global, this is really where the banks have gone in terms of connecting amongst each other as well as with their clients. And so it's this whole new ecosystem that is secure, that's tamper-proof, that transactions can occur. Whereas things in the past might have been paper-based, or they may have been, you mailed it in the mail, or you emailed it, but you couldn't, be sure that it wasn't going to get hacked. And so this is something that the financial services industry immediately went to. And if you think about the Square, which is, small business owners have them when you buy their book or you go into their coffee shop, they're starting to use blockchain to get into Bitcoin trading. So this is just another example of this technology is being applied in a variety of forms throughout a bunch of different industries. But if you think of it as that secure vault where the data is protected and secure, that's probably the best way to think about it. And then if you think about the media and entertainment industry, and you think about buying online tickets to a concert, or you think about a musician trying to manage the rights to their music or to their art, there's actually a very high fraud rate in digital transactions in the media and entertainment space. And so that industry and that sector has also gravitated to blockchain technology to keep that credit card data safe, to make sure that the tickets are actual tickets that aren't basically fake. And so that is also one of the ways that blockchain is showing up in the world. And then if you pivot over to the retail sector, I think of organizations like Starbucks. And so they are using this to verify the authenticity and safety of the goods that consumers are buying. So if you think about Starbucks buying coffee beans from someone in Costa Rica and wanting to package your coffee and be able to officially state that it's fair trade and that it's ethically sourced, this is how they are using blockchain. They're also using blockchain to look at consumer preferences and to gather that data and that insight on the types of products and services that consumers are consuming. So at this point, I'm going to take a pause and I want to find out if there are any questions about artificial intelligence, machine learning, or blockchain, and how they connect over into our work as communicators. Because I think these are some of the ones that we definitely need to have a better understanding of what they are, how they're being used now. These seem to be, in looking at all of these industrial revolution technologies, these seem to be at the forefront and have already gained traction in the world, and they're continuing to go and evolve, and companies are continuing to invest in these types of technologies. So Greg or Amy, can I turn it back over to you?
Sure. Tracy, here's a couple questions that came in for this portion. First one, have you tried any of the AI writing tools or bots?
I personally have not, but that sounds really interesting.
And then again, along the same lines, have you encountered the use of AI or machine learning among customers that you've worked with from a consulting standpoint?
Yes. Yes, I have. Yes, so the companies that I've worked with, and I'm going to step you guys through what I think you ought to do. They are looking at their customer journey, they are looking at their employee experience, and they are looking at their supply chain, and they are looking at cycle times to see where they can insert some of these technologies into their practices to either reduce cycle time or resolve customer issues quicker. So yes, I have seen that. I have seen them implement all of these technologies. And especially, I came from the state regulator in the insurance industries, and we used it there. And there was also, we used blockchain for document sharing amongst states to keep that data secure and clean. And so I have seen it. And a lot of it is around training people on how the processes have changed, and making sure that you have good documentation around that, but then also embedding that into any kind of onboarding when you onboard an employee, so that they understand how these systems work and how they impact the ultimate customer.
Got it. Okay, so then the other question that came in is, a lot of people, tell these stories externally, but what about internal communicators who either are attempting to use some of these technologies to communicate with employees or tell those stories? How does this equate to internal communication? Similar or very different?
No, I think it's that's actually a really great point. I think that our role as communicators is to use the power of storytelling and to, in whatever tactics and formats you have as an internal communicator, to be able to explain to your employees so that they better understand how your business is implementing these, and giving the success stories, and really stepping people through somebody in the company that may be responsible for these technologies, or how once they got implemented, how they're being used. A lot of these systems will also generate a lot of data, and we'll get to that when we talk about big data and what that really means. But I would say my recommendation, if you're an internal communicator and you have an intranet, you have a newsletter, you have digital signs, you have a mobile app, there are a million opportunities, I think, to create stories for your employees so that they understand that these technologies aren't taking their jobs away either. They're only enhancing and making your organization more competitive.
And you may have just answered our last question. What are the implications for communicators in terms of the evolution of the profession? It sounds like you may have hit on that just now.
So I think actually, and I'm going to get to this in a little bit, I actually have a couple recommendations for all of us as communicators that I got after I kind of went through this research basically and what I'm presenting to you. But I think that there's a couple opportunities for us to differentiate ourselves on a couple different fronts. One is really owning the customer experience. And understanding the data that we are getting out of some of these systems. I think that looking at the entire employee life cycle and making recommendations of where these technologies could maybe fit in is one point, as well as explaining it to employees. And then on the supply chain, I'll make some recommendations on that, is partnering with our supply chain leaders to really look at is there communications, some kind of communications that could be done to better educate employees as well as suppliers, as well as ultimate customers about how we are implementing these. So I'll make some recommendations later in the presentation, but I absolutely think that there's change management and marketing over your career, there's a real opportunity to step up to the plate and become more informed about data science. There's going to be this huge gap in the marketplace globally because the world doesn't have enough data scientists, and we'll talk about the data. But there's certificate programs out there. There are things that, you know, if you can get real smart on data science and these technologies, I think that will make you a more valuable communicator to your organization.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. That's all we've got right now.
Okay, well, let's press forward. Okay, so let's pivot over to virtual reality. So virtual reality is really that simulated experience. And so if you think about flight simulators, this is when this all kind of got introduced in the military back 30, 40 years ago, when the military was trying to train pilots and to really simulate what it would be like to fly a plane. And then that has evolved into entertainment and gaming. So if you think about video gaming and what that all has evolved to over the last 20 years, that's really been the next evolution. Virtual reality, unlike artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain, has not really advanced into the private sector as quickly, or it's very expensive to develop. That said, and there's been some false starts. If you think about Google Glass was the virtual reality, augmented reality project that Google had. Although I read yesterday, Apple is getting ready in 2022 to really step more fully into this virtual reality space. And so if you think about, here's some just quick examples that you might be able to relate to. So Pokemon Go was one of the first virtual reality examples. Snapchat came out with filters. If you've heard of Wayfair, they sell products online for like your kitchen and your bedroom. And you can actually go into the Wayfair app and you can actually pick out a bunch of products that you want in your kitchen, and you can go in and see what that would actually look like. And that's using virtual reality technology. And then I read about this virtual reality diversity and inclusion training program that is a training company has recently introduced. And what this is, if you think about unconscious bias and people that are maybe in executive leadership positions, so they've developed this program where they wear these glasses, and it's to teach employees what their other employees who aren't like them are experiencing at work. So it's all like this simulated training of I'm not being listened to, or I'm being ignored, or I'm being talked over, and the experience that someone who's not like them is having. And so I thought that was a really good example of where people are kind of experimenting with where does this make sense to use virtual reality. The other thing that I found really interesting is in the healthcare market. So if you're in the healthcare market, this is where the biggest spend is going to start to happen, is in virtual reality and augmented reality. And so it's going to be a $5 billion spend by 2025. But if you think about it, this makes sense too. It's being used today to train surgeons and to do simulations around patient treatment and care. And so medical students and residents are being trained using virtual reality as they are learning how to do different types of surgery. The other thing it's being used with is things like treating depression, cancer, autism, visual impairment. And I don't know the specifics of exactly how that works, but that is something that is being experimented with in the healthcare sector. And so if you think about it, this is kind of like Back to the Future kind of stuff, where it's actually here and we're actually seeing it. And so these are the types of stories I would think, if you're in the healthcare sector, that you want to profile and you want to show your organization as innovative, and show your clients what's possible, or to show your patients that you're really using the latest and greatest in technology. But this is really, it seemed to me in my research, healthcare and the healthcare market has really adopted this and said this is going to be really a game changer for us. And so this is where it's starting to really show up, and the money is being spent, right? So always follow the money. Where's the money being spent? So let's transition over to big data. So you hear about big data. It's like, what is big data? And so if you think about it, in the past, we would have these databases that would keep track of our data. And what's happened now with the advent of social media and all of the different types of technologies that they're out there is the data doesn't look the same. So for example, your picture on Instagram is not the same as a customer record, right? And so in the past, you could just throw your customer record into a CRM system, and that was how you tracked it. But now companies want to be able to merge that in and integrate and process this massive amount of data that doesn't look the same. And so they call that structured and unstructured. And so your traditional databases that have been out there from like the 60s and 70s and the 80s aren't really able to support the analysis of all this data to look at this. And I think it's pretty obvious. So they're looking for trends. They're looking for hidden patterns. They are looking for customer preferences and human behavior. And like I said, data scientists are really in demand. And so being able to decipher the data is going to be a really, really important skill set. And this is my challenge to you, is think about how you can develop your data scientist skills to enhance your communication skills. So the data is going to inform your communication strategy, if you think of it that way. And so as you start to learn more about your customer avatar, and you start to think about your employee avatar, and you think about when do people log into your system, and when do people buy, and what is the average sale, and things of that nature, that can then start to inform your marketing and communications. So that I think is going to be our biggest challenge. And if we want to really stand out as communicators, it's not only understanding the technology, but understanding how we can interplay and interface with the business and with the IT folks. So when you look at big data, they talk about the 5 V's of data. And so it's volume, variety, velocity, veracity, value, virtue. Virtue is the 6th one. So volume is really, if you think about the amount that gets generated every second. So that's pretty straightforward. It's the terabytes, the records, the transactions, the tables. Then you look at, like I said, the variety. So you've got structured, unstructured, multi-factor, probabilistic. So it's just sort of like oranges and apples and bananas in the cart. And then you look at velocity, and you look at that is the speed. And so is it real time? Is it batched at the end of the night? How does it line up with your processes and your work streams? And so it's coming at you all different paces, right? And so you've got a lot of it, it's different, and it's coming at you. Veracity means how reliable and trustworthy and authentic is it? Is it clean data is what you'll hear people talk about. And, you know, is it reliable? Can you trust what you are getting? Is it authentic? Is it original? How often is it available? Those types of things. And then value is the last piece, which it's only useful if you can turn it into something valuable, right? And so if you can come up with those correlations, if you can come up with some kind of statistical analysis, and that's really what the data scientists are doing, right? So they're looking at all of this. And then the next one that's kind of evolved is called virtue. And this is really all about data privacy, right? And this is all about Mark Zuckerberg being on the Hill in Washington testifying, and people challenging Google with what are they doing with our data, right? And so if you think about big data and how it's kind of out there, this is what people are talking about when they talk about big data. And so your organization has big data. They have lots of different data about your customers, your suppliers, your employees, your products, your services, what people are doing on social media. And so really, this is the deep dive into the data, right? And then have we allowed people to have our data? So that is big data. So the examples, I think these are pretty straightforward, actually. So Netflix is using it when you go on there to target ads to you and to tell you which, if you binge watched Orange is the New Black, you might like this other movie. Pepsi is using it. You know, if you think about Pepsi, they have a huge supply chain. And so they've got lots and lots of data globally. And they're analyzing this data, and they are, you know, squeezing on their supply chain to really, because their margins are so thin. So they're taking that data and they're really trying to get down into the weeds, basically, of the data. And then, of course, Amazon, we know they are running these targeted ads. They're also, from what I was reading, they are using it more on the customer service front, and really looking at what our behaviors are, what we're ordering on Amazon Prime, how can we, what are their returns, those types of things. And then, of course, the other thing I didn't realize, Starbucks is using it to determine where they want to place their stores. So this explains why sometimes there'll be Starbucks not too far apart from each other, but they've looked at the big data and they are confident that those two stores can stand on their own, even though they're closely co-located. And so these are sort of how the big brands are using big data. And then, of course, you know, smaller organizations or more middle market type companies can also use big data. Maybe just it's not as sophisticated or it's not packaged in such a way. The other thing I wanted to talk about was big data in the healthcare industry. So we talked about virtual reality in the healthcare space, but what I really wanted to talk about was medical data is going to double every 73 days by next year. And so as we age and as more people move into retirement and more millennials come into the workforce, there's going to be a huge spend on big data, artificial intelligence and machine learning in the pharma industry and in medicine in general. And this is based on a study that McKinsey did. And if you think about it, which are, you know, we've made so many advances in computational power that now they can start to predict. They can do a lot more predictive analysis on the diagnosis and treatment for, say you have diabetes or you have hypertension. And Centene, which is a healthcare carrier similar to like a Blue Cross and Blue Shield, they're using this to look at clinical data and then they're sending it real time to the providers. So if you think of the doctors, right? And so Centene is gathering all this information from people's claims data, and then they're able to send things back out to their provider community to give them more information. And so that's just how healthcare is using big data specifically, and that's where a lot of the spend is going to be. So Greg, I'm going to just pause here and see if there's any questions about these two technologies, virtual reality or big data.
Sure, we got a few. Let me give you one, the first one. Have you heard of any virtual reality applications to help virtual teams connect in a common space?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Have you heard of any virtual reality applications to help virtual teams connect in a common space? And spaces in quotes.
I have not, but that's a good question.
Okay. Next question. Can you share the name of the company that offers diversity and inclusion virtual reality experiences?
I don't know it right off the top of my head, but I can, if the person wants to email me, I read it in this week's Fortune magazine. It was in there.
Okay, I'll be sure and take that down and we can get that out to that person too.
Okay.
Another question, does that mean that interviewing data scientists to understand how they think is something that we should be looking at as ways to help us learn about how this technology will help?
Yes, my answer would be yes. Somebody else had a question. Somebody else had a question about CRMs and HRMs, so customer relationship management systems and human resource systems, and they wanted to know how they can get the most out of that data. I would suggest, because there's lots of different types of systems, but the best thing to do is to get with your IT partner, business partner, to really look at these CRM and HRM systems. They can segment the data on your customers and employees that can inform your marketing outreach. And so I think that sometimes some of the features aren't turned on, and that's why you can't get what you're maybe looking for. But you ought to explore the opportunity to maybe see what it would take to turn some certain features on. I know sometimes when these systems get deployed to big organizations, those aren't turned on just because they want to just get the system, the basic system out there. But there are sometimes additional features. And so that might be something for you to pursue to get more of the big data.
Okay, then we have two quick questions then. In a global world, how do you segregate big data based on local country governance?
That's a good question. I think it depends on how you've got your system set up and what you're trying to do. A lot of companies look at things globally and not in country. And so I think it's maybe piloting one particular in country to see if you can segment that out, because you can't bite off the whole elephant. Sometimes companies can't take on the whole thing. But if you could maybe have get with your IT business partner to do a pilot for a particular region of the world or a country in the world that you're trying to get that information, you might be able to do that quicker.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And just for the person who asked a question about virtual team collaboration, someone did chime in that Microsoft Teams can be used to accomplish that purpose. Also wanted to give you a heads up, Tracy, that it's about 1:43 now.
Okay. I will be quick. I just have a few more slides for you guys. So I really think that at this point, what you guys ought to think about is looking at the customer journey, the employee experience, and the supply chain, and really write down where these 5 technologies might be showing up for your company or your organization, right? And so here's some thought starters. So for the customer journey, my question is, have you mapped out your customer journey experience in detail from start to finish? Is it possible for you to insert one or more of these technologies into the touch points of your customer journey? Look at how can you support these touch points with more targeted communications. And remember, think like a consumer marketer, even if you work in a B2B or a B2G setting, okay? And then on the employee, and the example I'd like to give is the Dish Network uses machine learning to help drive what they call the customer lifetime value. They look across the entire journey to see, recognize, and build patterns. And so they are looking at, do you come in through their call center? Did you come in through their online website? Or do you need to be connected to a real life person? And so they are using machine learning across the customer journey to make less friction, basically, and to understand how customers are coming to them. Okay, so on the employee experience, same thing. Have you mapped out the employee life cycle, talent acquisitions, total rewards, active employee engagement, all the way to alumni? And are there places where you could implement any of these technologies? And then also, how would you support each aspect of the life cycle with customer or communications and marketing? And the example that I found here was the U.S. Navy having problems recruiting and enlisting new recruits. And what they were able to do is they were able to use machine learning, increase their spend on digital advertising to get them better recruits at the right time and in multiple different ways. And so that's just one example of how a technology could assist an organization. And the dollars are shifting now from their traditional ways that they were trying to attract people to digital. So let's talk about the supply chain. Again, get with your supply chain leaders to map out the supply chain process. Think about how any of these technologies could be used in your supply chain. For example, like blockchain, Starbucks sourcing beans, knowing that they're sourced from the right place, and then overlay that with maybe some innovative marketing and communications tactics that are going to support the supply chain communications in your organization. And then explaining that to your employees. So really, just to wrap up, what I think is our job is to lead communications and change management. And so the business is going to be transformed by these 5 technologies. And so it's incumbent upon us to really do a deeper dive. I've just given you kind of the surface level to know what they are and kind of the applications, so you can kind of get it straight in your mind. But really look at your industry, look at your competitors, look at these different experiences, customer, employee, and supply chain, to really, really define how we can kind of come up to speed. And I also wanted to just share with you that the recent IABC magazine and newsletter had articles about some of these technologies that you're going to want to check out. When I did my research, I looked at companies like Gartner, IBM, Accenture, PwC. I read articles in Forbes. I read articles in Inc. And one of the biggest futurists of the fourth industrial revolution is a guy named Bernard Marr, who publishes articles on LinkedIn, and he's a good guy to follow. But if you Google fourth industrial revolution, a lot of this stuff will come up. But I think that we're going to be better positioned as communicators for 2020 if we know what these are and we can articulate them and then incorporate them into our comms. So just to wrap up, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Tracy M on LinkedIn. If you have any follow-up questions, send them to me. I'm happy to answer them. I am on Twitter as Tracy I365, and I have a podcast like Amy and Greg mentioned in the beginning. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amy and Greg.
All right, great. Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate you bringing these insights to us. Now we're ready to answer some additional questions. Now you should see the things to think about slide we shared at the beginning of the program. And while you're putting your questions together, we have some that have come in advance. What's the number one takeaway you encountered from your research for this presentation?
I think the number one takeaway I have is these technologies are here and they're not going away. And so it's our job to really understand how they are changing the organizations that we work for. As the communicator, I think it's our job to be as informed as possible about the business transformations that these technologies are bringing. And really, as we plot out and plan 2020, 2021 communications and resources that we might need, I think this has got to kind of be in the front rear mirror.
Okay, so then as a follow-up to that, especially as internal communicators are thinking about this, should we plan to talk with our executives to help prep them for these changes, or do we touch in with them every 6 months to find out what the next step is? How do we best go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing is grab a hold of the strategy document that your business leader is putting together, their business plan with their technology partner, and really see where money's being spent on these and come to the table informed. I mean, I don't think it's our role to educate the business. I think it's IT's role to implement them, but we do need to partner with the business and with IT on where these things would kind of happen. So I think the more informed we are, and I think it's more about having the conversation with the IT team in terms of what are these things that you have on your, because some of these things take a while for them to implement and to fund. And so I think some of it is just understanding, if you're doing internal communications about the business strategy, these things should be mentioned if in fact they're being implemented. Okay.
And then here's a question that I'm sure is near and dear to a lot of hearts on the call. there any research that's been done about how users feel when they know they really want to talk to a live person? Before they can get there, they've got to go through the AI process.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that's out there, and people hate it because they know that it's a bot. And so yeah, there was a lot of articles that I read about that. And I think companies are looking at where they get dinged on, like, say, customer service, because people they want to go straight to getting their question answered. And so a lot of times on the customer experience side, that's a big part of what companies are looking at, because they know that people don't necessarily want that path. And that's why a lot of times they'll, like, say, even on the voice or even on the chat, if you want to speak to a real person here, like, they'll like shortcut your process. But yeah, there's a lot of sentiment out there. But I will tell you that in everything that I read, there's going to be more of this, not less.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, we don't have any other questions in queue right now. So why don't we go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks, Tracy, for being with us. If you have any further questions, you can always reach out to Tracy on social media or via her website. I just want to remind everybody, too, that our monthly webinar series will take a holiday hiatus and resume in January of 2020. Watch for more information coming in mid-December. We have some great speakers and topics in the queue, but we're always searching for more. If you're interested in presenting, let us know at communication@iabcheritage.com. And as we part company, we also want to make sure you're aware of a few things. Please complete the participant survey. It will open as you exit. If you have questions about the webinar or the IABC Heritage Region, or you'd like to get more involved, please email us at communication@iabcheritage.com. To learn more about IABC membership benefits, go to iabc.com/membership. And as we end, don't forget to take advantage of the World Conference Super Saver rate, which is in effect until December 31st. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.